From day one, WCW was against ravishing Rick Rude because he beat their superstar. On his very first day in the organization, he took down Sting. He was later stripped of his United States Championship unjustly due to a neck injury. Rick Rude was in constant conflict with WCW right up until his death. When he passed away, the official story was heart failure. But new footage has now surfaced that WWE legends say tells a very different story. One that points to foul play and raises the question of whether Rick Rude was actually murdered. Let me break it down. The buried footage was locked away for decades, passed quietly between retired wrestlers, grieving families and former executives who all agreed on one thing: if this tape ever leaked, it would destroy people. Now, WWE legends are saying it exists. Worse, they claim it shows that the final hours of ravishing Rick Rude were not what the public was told. Rick Rude, real name Richard Irwin Rude, was officially pronounced dead on April 20, 1999, at just 40 years old, with authorities citing heart failure caused by mixed medications. That explanation fit the era. It fit the narrative, and it allowed those in power to move forward without asking questions. But according to multiple wrestling veterans, the official story was decided before the investigation was even finished. Rick Rude wasn't just another wrestler, he was a problem. He was a rare performer who jumped companies during the most volatile period in wrestling history, appearing on Raw and Nitro on the same night, humiliating corporate leadership in real time. He was a walking lawsuit, a man who had already beaten an insurance company for millions after a career-ending injury. And by 1999, he was training for a comeback that certain people desperately didn't want. Former colleagues would later say Rude believed he was being sabotaged. Calls stopped getting returned. Doors suddenly closed. Conversations went silent the moment he brought up contracts, liability, and accountability. This wasn't paranoia, it was a pattern. Throughout the late 90s, multiple wrestlers who challenged the system ended up erased, buried, or explained away under suspiciously similar circumstances, something analysts now openly acknowledge when discussing the wrestling industry's long history of quiet damage control. Then there's the footage. According to insiders, the tape originated from a private, in-home interview filmed shortly before Rude's death, the same session that produced the widely circulated WCW clip where Rude sits calmly with a championship belt in his lap, explaining how the system worked against him. In that interview, Rude doesn't sound unstable. He sounds angry. "This gold belt that I have in my lap," he says, "what does it say on it? It says World Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. It doesn't say WCW World Champion. It doesn't say Asian World Champion. It doesn't say German World Champion." That clip aired publicly. What allegedly came after did not. Wrestling legends claim the camera kept rolling long after WCW said, "cut." And in those missing minutes, RD reportedly began naming names, talking about medical pressure, about being told to handle things quietly, about how wrestlers were expected to self-manage pain and stay silent or risk being iced out. One retired talent, speaking anonymously years later, claimed the unseen portion of the tape shows Rude saying, "If something happens to me, it wasn't an accident." That line has never been confirmed publicly, but the fact that multiple wrestlers independently repeat it has kept the rumor alive for decades. By the time people realized what the footage might actually mean, it was already gone. According to several veterans, the tape wasn't destroyed immediately. It circulated quietly, passed from hand to hand like a dangerous secret nobody wanted to be responsible for. One former WCW staffer claimed the footage was reviewed internally and flagged as legally sensitive, a phrase executives have historically used when material creates liability rather than clarity. What made this tape different wasn't emotion, it was coherence. Rick RD wasn't slurring. He wasn't erratic. He wasn't spiraling. He was methodical. Those who claim to have seen the footage say RD walked through a timeline, his injury, his insurance battle, his return conversations, and then stopped. That pause matters, because according to the public narrative, RD was supposedly embarrassed, unstable, and humiliated. Yet on the tape he allegedly looked directly into the camera and asked a question that still makes veterans uncomfortable: who benefits if I don't come back? Rick RD was training again in early 1999, not casually but aggressively. Friends confirmed he was preparing for an in-ring return despite his past back injury, a detail even defenders of the official story acknowledge when discussing his final months. A return meant renegotiations. A return meant medical clearances. A return meant liability. And perhaps most importantly, a return meant Rick Rude talking publicly again. This was the same Rick Rude who openly accused WCW leadership of bias and retaliation while holding a championship belt on camera. That wasn't storyline bravado. That was a performer publicly accusing his employer of mistreatment, something almost unheard of at the time. Within weeks of that interview, RD was gone. The official explanation, an accidental overdose tied to mixed medications, mirrored dozens of other wrestler deaths from the era, a pattern researchers now openly describe as systemic rather than accidental. But veterans insist those similarities are exactly what make RD's case unsettling. Because when deaths start looking interchangeable, scrutiny disappears. One longtime talent claimed the leaked footage includes Rude describing being encouraged to manage pain without formal oversight. No names were spoken, just implications. And in wrestling culture, implication is often louder than accusation. Then there's the alleged audio spike. Multiple people independently describe the same moment: a shift in tone, background noise, a second voice off camera. Not a threat. Not shouting. A correction, someone reminding Rick RD that the interview was supposed to stay on message. Moments later, RD reportedly asked for the camera to be turned off. The rest was never broadcast. And then there's Curt Hennig, Rick RD's closest friend. A man who rarely broke character. A man who almost never spoke emotionally on camera until after Rude died. According to those present, Hennig wasn't just mourning, he was furious. Angry that so few wrestlers attended the funeral. Angry that decades of loyalty evaporated overnight. But what unsettled viewers wasn't who stayed away, it was who Hennig seemed afraid to criticize directly. He circled the truth without naming it. Paused mid-sentence. Changed wording. Veteran fans noticed immediately. This wasn't just grief. This was fear. Soon after, the conversation shifted abruptly toward sensational rumors about RD's private life. Stories so humiliating and invasive that they drowned out legitimate questions. Stories that have since been widely dismissed as exaggerated or unfounded. That redirection worked. Fans stopped asking about contracts. Stopped asking about footage. Stopped asking why a man who appeared healthy on camera days earlier was suddenly framed as broken beyond repair. By the time Bruce Pritchard publicly labeled foul play speculation extremely silly, the narrative was already locked. But one question never went away among those who lived it. If Rick RD's death was so straightforward, why does footage allegedly exist that nobody is allowed to see? And why, after more than 2 decades, does the industry still treat the question like a live wire? The silence isn't just suspicious, it's instructive. Because in wrestling, what people refuse to talk about is often more revealing than what they say. Rick Rude understood that better than most. And that understanding may have been his most dangerous quality. The system failed him. By the late 1990s, professional wrestling wasn't just entertainment, it was a pressure cooker. Ratings wars. Grueling schedules. Injuries treated as inconveniences. A locker room culture where toughness was rewarded, and hesitation was quietly punished. Industry retrospectives now openly acknowledge how normalized this environment had become. Rick Rude had already paid the price once. His 1994 back injury in Japan didn't just end his in-ring career, it exposed how disposable even top stars could be. And when RD successfully collected on his Lloyds of London policy, it sent shockwaves through wrestling offices. Wrestlers weren't supposed to win those battles. Management was. That victory changed how RD was viewed, not as a team player, but as a liability. Former colleagues later said RD became more cautious after that. He documented conversations. He asked pointed questions. He no longer trusted verbal assurances. And in an industry built on handshakes and quiet understandings, that made him radioactive. By 1997 to 1998, RD's role had shifted. He was no longer just a performer, he was a reminder that wrestlers could challenge contracts, policies, and long-standing assumptions. His appearances with DX, his jump to WCW, and his association with Curt Hennig weren't just storyline beats. They were power moves that embarrassed executives on both sides of the ratings war. That's the context most fans miss. Rick Rude didn't die at his lowest point. He died while reasserting control. Multiple reports confirm he was actively training for a comeback in early 1999, despite years away from the ring, a detail even mainstream summaries of his death acknowledge. Training meant testing limits. It meant revisiting old injuries. And it meant re-entering a system that had never fully forgiven him. Veterans say RD wasn't reckless, he was calculated. He wanted medical clarity. He wanted assurances, and he wanted them on record. That's where the alleged friction escalated. According to insiders, RD felt pressure to manage lingering pain issues quietly rather than involve outside oversight. This wasn't unique to him. It was standard practice at the time, something journalists now describe as a systemic failure rather than individual irresponsibility. But Rick RD wasn't willing to play along. That refusal is what makes the missing footage so explosive. Because if the unseen portion of that interview shows RD clearly articulating concerns about medical pressure, liability, or retaliation, it becomes evidence, not of wrongdoing in a courtroom sense, but but of knowledge. And knowledge is dangerous. This is where Curt Hennig's behavior becomes impossible to ignore. After Rick Rude's death, his anger wasn't aimed at fans or the media, it was aimed at the business itself. Witnesses say he felt the industry had failed one of its most loyal craftsmen. But Hennig also knew the cost of speaking too freely. In wrestling, reputation is survival. That's why his emotional WCW interview feels unfinished, like thoughts deliberately left unsaid. It wasn't what Hennig said that unsettled people, it was what he didn't. Soon after, the industry did what it always does, it redirected the conversation. Salacious rumors and private speculation replaced serious questions. Gossip drowned out accountability. By the time foul play rumors were dismissed publicly, the narrative was already locked: official cause, tragic era, move on. But insiders didn't move on. Rude's death came during a time when wrestling was becoming more controlled, legal teams growing, PR tightening, archives being curated. That raises a simple question: if the footage showed nothing wrong, why was it never released? In an industry built on content, silence is rarely accidental. Veterans say the answer is clear. If Rude demonstrated awareness of pressure, risk, and expectations, responsibility shifts, and no company wants that exposure. He didn't need to accuse anyone. He only needed clarity. Today the tape remains a rumor, but the details never change: a calm Rick Rude, a stopped camera, and an industry that exhaled once he could no longer speak. The most disturbing part of Rick Rude's story isn't how it ended, it's how predictable the aftermath was. Wrestling didn't erase him, it reframed him. Questions about pressure and liability were replaced with nostalgia and highlight reels. He became a character again. And characters don't file complaints. Characters don't contradict official narratives. That's why many veterans say Rick Rude's Hall of Fame induction felt complicated. On the surface, it was a long overdue celebration of his talent. But to those who lived through 1999, it felt like a full stop: legacy finalized, story closed. To the public, it was closure. To insiders, it was containment. The industry could honor Rude's influence while sealing unresolved questions behind ceremony and applause. Over the years, several wrestlers have hinted they were quietly advised to let certain topics rest. Not threatened, not coerced, just reminded that revisiting them didn't benefit anyone. In wrestling, that's often enough. The punishment for speaking out isn't dramatic, it's silent. Calls stop getting returned. Bookings dry up. Invitations disappear. Analysts now openly describe this as a long-standing industry pattern: managing discomfort through omission rather than confrontation. What makes Rude's case linger is that he didn't fit the usual narrative. He wasn't spiraling. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was focused, training, planning a return, and re-entering a system he understood far better than before. That disrupts the idea of inevitable tragedy. After his death, veterans say something subtle changed backstage. Conversations shortened. Trust became conditional. Wrestlers learned, sometimes without being told, which subjects carried invisible consequences. This is how systems protect themselves, not through force but through conditioning. After 1999, wrestlers became more cautious about what they documented and who they trusted. Rick Rude's case became an unspoken warning: if someone with his leverage could be reduced to a footnote, anyone could. Medical narratives shifted too. Tragedies were framed as personal choices rather than systemic pressure, quietly closing deeper questions. At the same time, companies consolidated archives. Footage labeled non-essential or legally sensitive didn't disappear, it became inaccessible. Rick Rude's alleged extended interview fits that pattern: too revealing to air, too risky to explain. And systems don't rely on secrecy alone, they rely on fatigue. Over time, questions stop being asked. Rick Rude didn't just belong to the past, he became part of a reframed history. Wellness reforms followed, but reforms don't erase accountability, they redirect it. That's why the missing footage still matters. It represents something the industry has never been comfortable confronting: a wrestler who understood the system while still inside it. Rick Rude's awareness was contemporaneous, and that distinction matters. He didn't question the system years later, he understood it while still inside it. Veterans say wrestling has an unspoken hierarchy of stories. Some are safe and told endlessly. Others are whispered once and never repeated. Rick Rude's final chapter belongs to the second category because it challenges a core assumption: that performers didn't know what they were signing up for. Rude didn't leave proof. He left impact. And the unease that still surrounds his story suggests unfinished business. In an era obsessed with documentaries, some moments are never revisited for a simple reason: documentaries cure it. They celebrate what fits and omit what complicates, and Rick Rude complicated things. Younger wrestlers inherited that lesson. Not details but warnings. Which questions stall careers? Which concerns are safer kept quiet? That caution still exists, not out of fear but pragmatism. Veterans admire Rude's intelligence and courage, yet privately wonder whether being right was worth the cost. Rick Rude didn't become a martyr. He became a lesson. And lessons don't need headlines. They survive through repetition and silence. He once stood on camera holding a championship belt and calmly said the system worked against him. At the time, it sounded like confidence. With hindsight, it sounds like diagnosis, not just of his fate, but of what happens to anyone who becomes too informed, too independent, and too unwilling to stay quiet. Rick Rude's real legacy isn't controversy. It's awareness without resolution. And that may be the most uncomfortable legacy of all. Thanks for watching.